Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Please bring yourself to order. Right. I apologise for the slightly uncomfortable surroundings this evening. Due to the Council's wonderful technology, we don't have any air conditioning this evening. I have often said we need a retractable roof, but somehow or other the planning consent for that hasn't come through. But never mind. We don't have a fire drill this evening, but if by some chance we all overheat and there is a fire, the Democratic Services Officer, Mrs Snook, has just walked over there, will show us the way out, having established a safe route. Hopefully she'll come back and tell us what it is. Now, this meeting is being webcast by the Council's own webcasting service. May I ask if anyone else is intending to record the meeting this evening? It's not to stop you, it's just so we all know it's taking place. No, I'll take that as a no then. Before we go any further, due to the fact that certain members of the public were led to expect that the land south of Red Bull Lane, Linton, wouldn't be heard as the first item, I am going to take the two Jubilee School items before that, because I don't want members of the public turning up at 7 o'clock or 7:30 for that debate and it being half over. So I do apologise for anyone who feels disadvantaged. But both the Jubilee School applications and the Linton one will be heard this evening. But I am varying the order because of that. Now we move on to the formal agenda. Apologies for absence. I've received one from Mike Hemsley. Anyone else? Matt Borton, who is still in America, I believe. Lucky him. Notification of substitute members. Councillor Butler for?
Councillor Bolton.
Councillor Burton?
For Councillor Hemsley.
Thank you very much. Item 3, notification of visiting members. Councillor Perry, first of all. What item are you here for, please?
I actually don't know the agenda number, but it's the Staplehurst Cricket Club.
Right, thank you very much. Mr Atkinson and Mr Harper, I assume you're both here for the Jubilee School applications. Councillor Daly, are you here for the same thing? Thank you very much. Councillor Webb? And Councillor Firma, the same? Thank you very much. We will be being joined later on by Councillor Bryce, I'm coming to you in a minute, who is going to be coming for the Staplehurst application. She isn't here yet, but she is on her way. And Councillor Ells, I believe you're just observing. Thank you very much, Councillor. Anyone I've missed? No, I think that's everyone. Thank you. Items withdrawn from the agenda, I'm not aware of any. Are there any? No withdrawn items. Date of adjourned meeting, that will be the 13th of July. I fear that we may need one, but although we will try to be as rapid as reasonable. Item 6, any business the Chairman regards as urgent, including the urgent update report as it relates to matters to be considered at the meeting. It's agreed we take the urgent update reports, members. Thank you. Disclosures by members and officers. Item 7, Councillor Prendergast first.
Chairman, I took legal advice before the start of this meeting. Is this on?
Yes.
In my role as a Kent County Council member, I have concerns about the education provision in Maidstone as we go forward, but I haven't taken any part in any conversations regarding the school's application, so I intend to listen to all the evidence that's presented tonight, and I will make my mind up following that. Thank you.
Just to add to that, of course, it isn't a KCC application. Any other disclosures? No. We will take disclosures of lobbying with the particular application, as there are so many of them. Item 9, to consider whether any item should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. There are no yellow pages this evening, so I intend to take everything in public. Item 10, minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of June 2017. Members should have seen these minutes. Are they agreed as an accurate record? Thank you. Item 11, presentation of petitions. If any, are there any petitions? No, there aren't. Right. We move now to the planning application agenda as set out, which commences, as I just said, with item 13, page 15, Jubilee Free School, Gatland House, which is the first two applications. Just before we start on the individual applications, may I say these and some other items on the agenda this evening are deeply controversial. Members of the public and indeed councillors may have strongly held views and opinions which are not the same as those that have just been expressed by other councillors or members of the public or whatever. I would ask everyone to maintain decorum, don't applaud or boo or hiss or any other things, because otherwise I will have to basically take action about that. Please respect opposing points of view. And may I also ask any member who is not using technology for the proper purpose to please switch it off, because comments have been made in the past about inappropriate use of electronic equipment in meetings. Right, we now move on to the first application, and I'll ask the officer to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Right, this is an application for an extension to Jubilee Free School that was first heard on the 25th of May and was deferred for a number of reasons, which I can highlight as followed. The lack of on-site play space, open space, in accordance to standards, the landscaping quality of that was proposed, lighting, ecology and renewables, and whether the extent to which they were included in the development. So I'll just run through the plans to refresh everyone's memory and the proposal, and then I'll go through the various issues that lay behind the deferral. So there's a site there, which was approved as a school in 2014, existing site plan, some photographs of the frontage of the site. There's the building there, front elevation, facing Gatland Lane. Sort of down the side of the building towards the rear of the site. There's the front of the building again, and looking along Gatland Lane with the no parking and WL lines, and the access to the Gatland playing fields and its car park. And there's looking back from the playing fields towards the school, which has football pitches and other recreational facilities. See that there looking down. This is how it looks at the moment. Side elevations. And this is the proposed site plan, which essentially shows an extension running off from the rear and essentially seeks to create a two-form entry primary school from its existing one-form entry with the building extension up the side boundary with its play space in the intervening area between that and the car parking. And you can see the residential properties surrounding that. So essentially, I'll go through the various issues now that justified the deferral. And so essentially, the major first reason was the lack of on-site play space. The school met the first requirement for on-site space, but failed on the hard PE space and off-site soft PE space. It wasn't in accordance with the government standards. But obviously, as the report set out originally, those standards are meant to be considered flexibly, especially into situations where, such as free schools, etc. So essentially, since the deferral, the applicant has held a meeting with councillors and officers to discuss the various issues, and including the play space issue, and they have looked further at the use of Gatland playing fields to the west, and the feasibility of that, which would compensate for lack of on-site space. They're proposing to hire one pitch two half days per week during term time, and it would be fully supervised and divided from the rest of the playing fields, as you can see with those barriers. And staff members would supervise. I think it's 6 to 8 members of staff. So essentially their school and PE would be carried out on that playing field. The Maidstone Borough Council Parks Department have been consulted, and they've got no objections to that strategy or the principle of block booking long-term use of those playing fields by the school. The other matter relating to play space was the agreement with Bower Grove School, which was dated from 2014. As set out in the report and the urgent update, there hasn't been an updated agreement forthcoming, and I seen something circulated prior to the meeting from the head of Bower Grove School, which essentially said that there wouldn't be a binding agreement between the schools, but there would be a potential occasional use on a planned basis. So essentially that
I did say, and I will not tolerate interruptions from anyone.
So essentially the position is the school will rely on.
Thank you. Right, I'm just going to ask the legal officer to explain how the public speaking act works this evening. Mr. Fitzpatrick. Thank you very much indeed. Our first speaker this evening, I think, is Mr. Skinner, an objector. If you'd come forward, Mr. Skinner. You press the grey button in the middle, please.
That's working.
Hello? Okay. The decision tonight will probably be one of the most difficult and onerous you have ever had to make. We are not debating a planning application for a housing development or a building extension. We are discussing the safety and welfare of young infants. The deferral at the previous planning meeting was to allow planning officers to cobble together some arrangement that would satisfy BB 103 school guidance in play areas. The conclusion is a real dog's dinner. It states a chain link barrier supervised by staff members is sufficient to allow space for youngsters to freely and, more importantly, safely play in. Understandable maybe from planning officers pressurised to push this through, but I find it inexcusable coming from Jubilee, who seem to put safety and welfare of infants at risk to obtain their aims. Let's consider this. Would you as a parent be happy with your child playing in a public park on display to anyone wishing to observe with just a chain link rope as a barrier? Even on TV, faces of children are obscured, and I remember not being allowed to video my own children at Christmas plays. Would you as a parent be happy with your child playing in a public park with just a chain link rope and staff as a barrier against dog walkers with their animals roaming freely? Is that really good enough? The consequences could be horrendous. And would you be happy with your child playing in a field with dog's faeces and various other animal waste present, and at the last look, broken glass to contend with? At the previous meeting, Councillor Clark stated his daughter's school is in virtual lockdown during the day. For obvious reasons. Quite right. Children's safety is paramount. It seems Jubilee are quite ready to considerably lower the safety bar to push this grubby deal through. I have documents here stating that 136 local residents objected to this school in the original application, many on the grounds of safety of the pupils. These concerns cannot be overlooked. Recent tragic events have shown what can happen when the views of local residents are ignored by council officials. If you as planning committee are completely satisfied these arrangements comply with BB 103, then you must vote accordingly. If, however, you are not convinced and even have the slightest doubt, you cannot pass it. Your decision tonight is all about the safety of these children being on public display and open to all eventualities, protected by just a chain link rope and a few staff members. Please don't fail them.
Mr. Owen from Safe Ant Farm, please.
Yes, thank you. The attitudes of local residents to Jubilee School is well known and documented. We are not against children's education. We have all been there, and we are not against Jubilee School per se. What we have and still object to is the location and the patent lack of provision for the holistic health of the pupils who live in 2017 and not 1917. It is very clear from the site, and this has been acknowledged in the officer's report at 5.1 and 5.3, that the site can't cope with 410 pupils planned. Indeed, it is debatable whether it can cope satisfactorily with the existing 210 already permitted. What is proposed doubles the number of pupils on half the presently available playing area. In the committee meeting of the 17th of November 2015, 13 conditions to the consent were applied. I see that it is now proposed to attach a further 17. It is interesting that few of the 13 already in operation have been adhered to, or more importantly, enforced. In the officer's report from paragraphs 5.1 to 5.6, much is made of the hoped-for availability of the facilities at Bower Grove School. You will have seen the letter provided this afternoon from the head teacher of Bower Grove, which all but closes the door to this prospect, as she states. We would, of course, on occasion, allow use of our field. A school functions for 40 weeks of the year, 5 days a week, and staff must be able to plan lessons and recreation with the facilities that are known to exist at all times. An occasional use that does not fit that criteria. There was never an agreement in 2014 between Jubilee School and Bower Grove. It was merely a letter of understanding, not an agreement. It is now very clear that the hope for benefits of adjacent areas are rapidly being removed from the horizon. With a playground of around a third of an acre being the only asset in the ownership of the school, it is now clearly apparent that any increase in pupil numbers offers and above those already permitted will severely and adversely affect the inclusive education of children that children of this age are entitled to. These sentiments are well known to this Council. We have all seen in West 14 what happens when warnings are ignored by those in authority. Mr. Chairman, we, the residents, urge you to dismiss this application for the sake of the children.
Thank you very much. Would councillors at the back there trying not to, talk over what's happening? Mr. Fitzgerald for the applicant, please.
I think my microphone's already on, isn't it? Following the deferral in May, the applicant team met with the planning officers and members on the 5th of June to discuss the conditions raised. The team listened to the issues and agreed to provide supplementary information and amend the planning application. It is accepted that amendments to the scheme will result in a more positive proposal in ecological, sustainability, energy use and lighting terms. It's also been confirmed that conditions to set relevant targets and requirements in connection with these items are acceptable. The main issue was the partial use of Gatland Recreation Ground for some elements of PE provision. There are 3 football pitches marked out in the park, which can be hired through the council. The school will seek the use of one of those pitches for 2 half days during a school week. These will not be used during school holidays. This totals 6 hours per week when the school is running and has been confirmed as acceptable by the Parks Department. This off-site provision, together with the facilities on-site, which includes an all-weather pitch, indoor sports hall and hard surface informal social areas, allows the school to meet its curriculum requirements for PE. The school also confirms that provision for PE can be met without the use of any adjoining facilities at Bower Grove School, a strategy which the committee was critical of. The school will therefore rely on the strategy outlined a moment ago for PE. However, discussions are ongoing with the head of Bowergrove School to determine how both schools can continue to benefit from shared facilities. In considering the approach to outdoor space, it's important to bear in mind that the building bulletin requirements are not planning policy. They are for guidance purposes and are flexible. In addition to the extract from the bulletin provided by the officer at paragraph 5.5, it is also worth reflecting on the following statement from the document, which reads as follows. Some schools will be on restricted sites and will not have enough outdoor space to meet requirements on site. In these situations, pupils will need to be provided with access to suitable off-site provision. On restricted sites where space will be at a premium, a flexible approach to the site area and the management of the use of that area will be needed. The strategy for outside play is considered entirely appropriate based on the constraints of the site and other educational priorities for the school. Thank you for your time.
The next speaker is Councillor Atkinson.
Thank you, Chairman and members. As I was saying 6 weeks ago, this school opened without the benefit of planning permission. This was achieved well over a year later. Part 4 of the school's travel plan states that their ethos is to follow the golden rule, love your neighbour as yourself. Well, I can only say that Jubilee School does not appear to be heeding its own philosophy. July last year, Councillor Borton and I attended a meeting with some of the trustees of the school, which was allegedly intended by the school as a bridge-building exercise with the local community. At no time during this meeting did they give any indication that they planned to put in planning applications to increase the footprint of the building by 50% and double the number of pupils. 3 weeks later, they put in planning applications to increase the footprint of the building by 50% and double the number of pupils. Good neighbours? I don't think so. I'd also like to remind members that when Gatland House was first used in the 1980s, a condition was imposed preventing the building being converted into a school. This is unusual for a D1 category building, but was clearly applied in recognition of the complete unsuitability of this site for use as a school, principally due to the volume of traffic in Gatland Lane. 30 years on, the volume of traffic has increased considerably. The planners back then knew what they were doing, and I hope that the current members of the Planning Committee will keep this in mind when coming to their decision. There are far too many bones of contention in the original planning report to be able to go through them paragraph by paragraph, so being selective, para 1.2 refers to a boundary of well-established conifer trees. Unfortunately, this application involves the felling of this 10-metre-high screening. Para 5.3, a letter of support says that the school has stopped Gatland Lane being used as a rat run and cars do not obstruct traffic. This is patently not the case, as members will know from the recent email from a local resident detailing an accident caused by parked cars obstructing traffic. Para 8.1, need. As I understand it, Jubilee School is not currently able to fill all its places. The report says there are deficits of a mere 4 and 10 places from 2017 to 8 and 2019 to 20. The new school plan for Hermitage Lane will surely remove the need for any expansion to Jubilee School. Noise impacts. Well, most of the impact from noise actually comes from the noise of male teaching assistants, and the present air conditioning unit by Sherborne Drive is very noisy as well. Proposed condition 9, they've had nearly 2 years to introduce a crossing patrol and walking buses. They still haven't done so. In conclusion, this proposal is completely unsuitable for this site, so I'd like to propose that permission is refused on the grounds that it is out of keeping with the neighbourhood by reason of its size and is inappropriate in a residential area. Thank you, members.
Next speaker is Councillor Harper.
I wish the committee to reject this proposal based on the new evidence available today. The concerns remain on the lack of outdoor space. Paragraph 5.1, page 18, demonstrates a massive lack of outdoor space. When full, two-form entry, there will be 14 classes. Each class requires at least 2 PE lessons a week. That is at least 28 lessons a week. How can these proposals be met with what's suggested? The school has said it would use one pitch at Gatland Park for the maximum of 6 hours a week. Gatland Park, as you'll be aware, is subject to the Public Health Act 1961, paragraph 52, Management of Parks and Pleasures Grounds, section 3B, refers to the limitations on exclusive usage of public parks. It states that no more than 25% of a park can be enclosed at any one time, and in exercising these powers, Maidstone must satisfy that they have not unfairly restricted the space available to the public for games and recreation. Therefore, when the school wish to use a pitch, all access routes to the park need to be unobstructed, including those from the alleyway between the school and Gatland Park. How will the school cope with broken glass, litter and dog's mess on the site, plus putting up and taking down temporary fencing? That would take time, and if only booked for 6 hours on 2 separate days, how much time is going to be available for sport on those days? An hour? 2 hours? You hear that Jubilee has not yet needed to use Bower Grove's land. The non-binding agreement on page 45 was signed in 2014. That head teacher for Bower Grove and also the Jubilee have both left posts. At 1:30 today, I spoke with the current head of Bower Grove. I can only say I was not surprised by what Mrs Salter told me. Bower Grove have not and will not make a formal agreement with Jubilee for the use of their playing fields. Bower Grove requires sole use of their fields at all times. As a special school for children with social and emotional needs, their children need to have permanent access to quality outdoor space. Bower Grove may, however, allow on a one-off basis a neighbouring school to perhaps use the site for the occasional sports day. And that is the limit of the cooperation they have said they are willing to do. By legislation, Gatland Park has a limitation under the...
I'm sorry, I'm going to stop you. You are getting louder and louder. There is no need to shout with a microphone system. Would you please just tone it down a bit?
By legislation, Gatland Park has a limitation under the Public Health Act as to how much land can be used by anybody at any one time. There is no solution, therefore, to the lack of space. In November 2015, your committee considered the school should be limited to one form FE. Nothing has changed. No new land has appeared. In fact, over half the land they were suggesting using has now vanished.
Okay,
it's
Councillor Harper, that's
2017, not 2018.
That's 3 minutes, Councillor Harper. Yes, and I added another 10 seconds back on for that. May I ask members with the microphone system and officers, there's a microphone system for a reason. It is not necessary to address this meeting as if you were a Methodist preacher in a church with no microphone. Councillor Daly.
I'll pretend to be a cardinal. There we are. Chairman, I sit here once again to plead on behalf of the local residents of Gatland Lane, although they do a great deal for themselves and have sent in many well-written and researched objections to these applications. I've made my own representation, as you will know, but it is confined to the right of the situation and not the government's perceived idea that everything they want must be granted under threat. The plain fact is that this site is not fit for purpose as a two-form entry primary school. I don't much care if it's called a free school or an academy or a foundation or any other fancy name. It is in effect a place where children are expected to be taught in good and adequate surroundings. This site cannot ever be thought of to be of such size and with such facilities as to give anything like the proper environment for young education. To think that everything it needs should be at the expense of others and particularly to deprive the locals of the public open space, which is already in deficiency of provision for the whole of North West Maidstone, is not, to my mind, either right or sensible. There is no evidence, as we've heard, that the agreement has been negotiated with Bowergrove School and their recreation facilities. There is still no agreed travel plan. The published admissions number for this school is currently 30 places and for a one-form entry, and yet this coming year there are only 21 applied for places. There is no evidence that this school needs two forms of entry, and it will cause so much disruption. There is a new two-form primary school in Train currently to be available within 5 years, which will be a two-form entry situated 1 mile north and with 2.5 hectares of land, as is normal for such a school. To think that it is possible to have games and other activities on a public open space without adequate fenced-off protection is against current Ofsted guidelines, as evidenced in Oakwood Park. In 2014, you agreed to restrict the site to a one-form entry school. Nothing has changed. It is not in any way different from the basis of that decision, and therefore should not now be altered in any way. It can just as well proceed with its current working, which is still not in any way at capacity and does not call for extra. Officers have made great argument about paragraph 72 of the NPPF, with its call for great weight to be given to schools, but have totally ignored paragraph 77, which is the one which is supposed to give protection and great weight to the local interest in open spaces and to prevent diminution of that use where it is seen and known to be of value to the local population. Why is this so blatantly ignored?
Councillor Daly, I'm going to have to stop
you
there.
should uphold your previous decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. Now, members, I'm going to take declarations of lobbying. I'm sure most of us have. Please indicate. I think everyone is indicating, so that's everyone has been lobbied. Right, I draw your attention, if you haven't noticed, to the urgent update on the papers. If you haven't read it already, I would hope that you would, as it's part of the consideration this evening. Now, before we go any further, Councillor Bolton, who is one of the ward members of Fant, is on holiday in the United States, and he apologises for not being able to be here. I understand, however, and I have agreed, that he has given a statement to the Vice Chairman of the committee, and I'm going to call on the Vice Chairman to read out that statement on behalf of the ward member.
Thank you, Chair and members. On behalf of Matt, I will read his statement. Firstly, I am sorry I cannot be present tonight. I'm afraid I am abroad on a pre-arranged visit. However, I remain concerned about this application, as issues raised when this was last debated have still not been resolved. Members of the Planning Committee can only reject this application on the grounds of which it was deferred, and subsequently we cannot dismiss it on the grounds of principle of development being wrong. However, the case for rejection on the grounds of a lack of outdoor space are even more overwhelming, and the problems have not been resolved. It should be remembered that these guidelines have been brought in for new schools. While some existing schools granted permission before these regulations were enacted may have similar-sized play areas to the ones proposed, the new regulations are there for a reason. Children spend 15% of their lives at school, and with many not having access to play areas outside their home, it is utterly crucial they have sufficient space at school. Yet while great flexibility is allowed on the space required by the schools, the Planning Committee still needs to judge how flexible it wishes to be. I would suggest that, considering how woefully short a space we are, as discussed 6 weeks ago, that there are still no grounds for this being flexible. As things stand, there remains no formal agreement with Bowergrove School for the use of playing fields since 2014, signed by the previous head teacher of Bowergrove School. Planning applications should be judged on the evidence placed in front of us at the moment, and not vague promises about what may come in future. Therefore, I challenge the statement in paragraph 5.5 of the updated report in front of you, that this provides sufficient evidence of use of playing facilities. Please remember this is school children we are talking about here, and their access to physical education during learning hours. It is not something which can be gambled on, a historic with a teacher no longer in post. That the schools are working together does not mean that an agreement will be reached. Furthermore, members should be aware that since the previous discussion, there has yet to be any consultation with ward councillors about the use of Gatland Park playing fields. Therefore, I do not know quite why MBC Parks and Leisure see fit to offer such substantial assurances in this report at such short notice. The use of this park will have a major impact on existing residents in a densely populated part of town where there is already a severe shortage of maintained playing fields for residents. Furthermore, like the agreement with Bowergrove School, there has yet to be any formal agreement with MBC. I hope members will listen to the community and reject this planning application this evening. While improved landscaping plans are helpful, planning applications should not be approved when there remain so many basic flaws within the proposals. Put simply, this school wishes to operate beyond its capabilities on a site of this size. The impact to the whole community will be great, and the potential impact on pupils to Jubilee School who don't have enough space in which to play will be greater still. Please reject the application in front of you on these grounds tonight. Yours, Matt.
Thank you very much, Councillor Round, for doing that. Right, I will now go to general debate. I think I saw Councillor Cox first and then Councillor Harwood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We've heard earlier on from Mr. Fitzgerald that there are constraints on this site. He's not wrong. We've been shown how the Gatland Lane Recreation Ground can provide adequate and safe use for PE. Could we just see the slide? There you are. Those lovely bollards that have about a 3-foot off the ground chain. Now, last time I checked, dogs don't stop at that, and we are talking an open field. I know there are other places in our borough where we've been told that an open space like this has to be fenced off to protect children. I just can't see. We asked to go away and satisfy the fact that there is not enough space in this proposal, and we were shown this. It's back in here again. I've written mine out because it's not of any use to me at all. And the other information we've been shown today shows that Bowergrove are not happy due to many of their students and the stability of their own students and the environment that they need to be in to conduct their own school life. I think we are once again looking, yes, we need education, but we need it in the right place, with the right surroundings, and in the right size plot to provide safe environment for our children to go to school in. This is not, I cannot support this. I really can't. I'm sorry.
Councillor Harwood, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Without wanting to sound like a stuck record, we are a regulatory committee, and therefore we have to have grounds and we have to operate within the planning framework. And that is the problem that currently confronts us. I'm really a little bit concerned that if we are naive as a committee, or worse, and we seek to grandstand, we will actually betray local residents far more than if we are level-headed in any decision that we make. We know that given the government's ideological commitment to free schools, we know what inspectors are being told. This is a policy statement from the Minister on planning for schools, and it states, given the strong policy support for improving state education, the Secretary of State will be minded to consider such a refusal or even imposition of conditions to be unreasonable conduct, unless it is supported by clear and cogent evidence. And the problem is, we can't find any clear or cogent evidence in terms of the planning framework we operate within. We have, as a committee, done everything that we possibly can. We put a deferral in place. We have negotiated changes to the scheme, which, if we get an appeal, we will not be introduced. We will get the original application, and that will be it. And the problem is, if we do refuse and we get the original application, it is a betrayal, because we know what the planning framework does. We know what the ministers have said. We know what's going to happen. There's an inevitability. And we and the residents feel better for a few months, then they have to live for years with the consequences of that. And that is the real challenge that's facing us. I mean, the point has been made around the open spaces and so on. I mean, frankly, get real. Look where free schools are opening up. In former offices, above shops, in warehouse commercial premises on industrial estates with no open space. That's the whole point in free schools, that they've got a freedom to basically operate where the market and where parents will work with them to do it. So I just make a plea that if we are looking at this, we need to look at getting the best possible scheme, and we really need to kind of search our consciences as to whether we really think that an inspector is going to throw this out, because I know what I think. And on that point that was made by my colleague, Councillor Cox, about fences protecting small children, I'd say all of the fences that have gone up around school playing fields that I'm aware of end up protecting planning applications for housing or new schools. I don't think there's much of an argument that they're to protect anyone other than the future plans of that school. So that's all I can throw into the debate. But I am concerned that we will end up ruining the day.
It's not a good situation to be in. I wish I didn't agree with Councillor Harwood. We have seen recently where the council and the inspectorate thought they were on very secure planning grounds with Fant Farm itself, that the Secretary of State has seen minded to quash, and doesn't necessarily mean it happened, but the very firm planning grounds that we as a council thought we were on, and the inspector as well thought we were on, have been quashed. We are on much less firm ground here, and we know that there is a very strong driver in favour of this. So there is a risk here, because the Secretary, we may well find the situation that the decision gets quashed anyway, because the Secretary of State believes that we shouldn't have added any conditions at all. So we may not even get those. But what is fairly certain is if we go to appeal, it will be at the original application. Now, some people might say that's not much worse than the amended applications, but so there is a judgment to be made there. What I would say is that many of the reasons that we did look at for the deferral in terms of renewable, the landscaping, and to an extent, but only to an extent, some of the car parking has been addressed. The car parking, I think, would need to be further addressed in relation to a second resolution if the application were to be granted. There is a need for a traffic regulation order to deal with some of the parking issues that residents have quite right and councillors have quite rightly raised. But that's a second resolution and not technically part of the application. I'm in two minds because, personally, I don't like this application. I think it really is squeezing a pint into a ounce pot, a fluid ounce pot, frankly. And if this were a county council application or almost anything else, it wouldn't be going ahead. But free schools were set up deliberately to allow this sort of thing to happen, frankly. And I don't blame Jubilee School for doing that, because the process has been set up to allow them to do that. So nothing I say should be taken as a criticism of Jubilee for using a process which is what the process is. So I am in two minds. I don't think that we will necessarily have the right outcome that residents want if we do turn it down. However, there is some chance, but it's not very high. What we can't do is, I think, given other decisions elsewhere, we can't, not that anyone has mentioned it yet, we can't use highway grounds or landscape grounds or parking grounds because those have been addressed to a large extent in a deferral. So it does all come down to a decision on the reasonableness or otherwise of the size of the plot and the open space provision. It really has all come down to that argument. Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. I know that we do have to be flexible, but we have to look at each case and see what it is we're being flexible about. And when I look at how inappropriate this seems, I sort of wonder if this was an application, if you sort of look at the other side and say, well, it should go ahead, the government wants this, the government wants that, what if this was a sixth form entry application? And then there was a couple of notes in here that said that Mason Hospital might be willing to allow some of their curtilage to be used. I think we've got to look at what we've got in front of us, think about our concerns for why we deferred in the first place, and wonder and consider whether they've been addressed. I note that they mentioned that 6 members of staff will be taking these children to this area, but who's going to? Are those 6 members of staff going to take 15 minutes before they take the children out there to set up these barriers and to forensically go across this piece of grass to make sure there aren't any sharp needles or drugs paraphernalia that could be just sitting out there from use at lunchtime before the afternoon? It's of great concern to me, and while you can actually identify the area that's being bound with such an arrangement, you will have stray dogs running around, or not even stray dogs, people taking dogs into the park, taking them on the leashes off the leashes they have done for years in the past, and a dog's not going to look at a boundary and say, can't go there, there's school kids. It's a major concern, and I really don't feel that my concerns were addressed that led to this deferment in the first place.
Councillor Vizard. Well, you definitely did, but if you changed your mind, that's fine. You did. But Councillor Spooner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm coming into this rather controversial saga rather late in the day, but perhaps I can make some useful comments. It seems to me that there is a very blurred distinction that has to be made between the material planning considerations that we have to take into account in deciding this application. There's a distinction between those, and there's a distinction that has to be made with the internal management.
Could you just get a little closer?
Sorry, shall I start again? It seems to me that there is a blurred distinction that has to be made between the material planning considerations that we need to take into account in determining this application, which in effect just relate to the simple question, is this parcel of land suitable or not to accommodate a 400 pupil school? That is the basic question we need to answer. There is another set of issues relating to what I would define as the internal management of the school, i.e. how it's going to provide its open space, or its fields are going to go. That seems to me to be outside the planning spectrum. That is a matter for the school to decide. I'm very, very much opposed to this application. I think it's an effrontery to the local residents. It's an over-intensive development of the site, detrimental to the amenities of the residential people around there. And I think that we can craft reasons of refusal that are sufficiently robust in planning terms, which I'm sure would stand a very good chance of persuading the inspector, if it does go to appeal, to dismiss the appeal.
Councillor Mumford, then I'll bring the officer back.
I think, like everyone here, we don't like this application. Highways have fallen away, the landscaping's fallen away, and we're left with this consideration of open space. And just to balance what we're talking about, I mean, this BB 103 does ask us to have a flexible approach. I think we can say that this Bower Street School, I think that's gone. I don't think that will be provided. And we're left with the Gatland play area. Now, people are talking here as if that's unique, unusual, or a way round the rules. It is not unique. My primary school, cross a major road and go to a public recreation ground with one member of staff. And that's how they operate. So what is being proposed here is not unique. I'm not sure whether we should accept it, but it's not unique, and it is not a way to get round the rules, because there are others that use public play areas for their outside sports. Just want to bring a balance into this.
Mr. Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened quite attentively. I don't propose to go through exactly in terms of the policy remit. I just wanted to point out some of the key policy areas. I'm not going to go through them in huge detail, but first of all, we had the 2011 policy statement, Planning for Schools Development. It states there should be a presumption in favour of state-funded schools expressed in the MPPF, and I'll defer to that in a minute. And it said local authorities should give full and thorough consideration to the importance of enabling the development of state-funded schools in their areas, and that the Secretary of State will attach significant weight to the need to establish and develop state-funding schools when determining applications. If I could just refer members to page 32 of your report. I'm not going to set it out, but in terms of need, it goes from paragraph 811 to 813, which sets out the need for the school in this locality. In terms of moving through, Councillor Harwood's already raised the issues in terms of the strong policy support and the issue in terms of refusals and unreasonable behaviour. I'm sure members are very aware of the cost implications of those issues. If I could then just turn to the MPPF, which came out in 2012, which again says great weight to the need to create, expand or alter schools and work with school promoters to identify and resolve key planning issues. So in terms of the issues before members, we've brought back an additional report to address some of the concerns for members. I would again point out that members have already raised the issues of the BB 103, which applies flexible standards. So effectively where we're left with is the use of the Gatland Park playing fields. In terms of the issues raised by both Councillor Clark and by Mr Spooner, I would agree that in terms of schools have their own internal risk assessments. Those internal risk assessments would have to be carried out when they're using public places. So that would be something that would have to be dealt with internally through the system to secure the safety of those school children. They are responsible for those children when they go out into a public area, and their risk assessments would have to take that into account. And again, I think lastly, I would just refer members to the duty in terms of section 38(6) of the Act, which require members to determine the application in accordance with the development plan unless material indications dictate otherwise. I've set out in terms of the very strong policy objections, the very strong policy support for the school. I do apologise. And effectively what members are left with the decision in terms of a reduced play area. The school have come up with alternative measures. I think the officers accept in terms of they don't meet the guideline standards, but again, there are lots of other schools in the country. The applicants have provided details where primary schools provide less than that standard, and then one has to look at, is Maidstone an exception to that area? So I think I'll just finish on the issue that there is a substantial need for new schools in the area. That's set out in the report, and that's where the government policy seeks to support that, and there'd have to be exceptional reasons to come forward to justify an alternative decision. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, Councillor Burton, that's your turn now.
Thank you, Chairman. Much of what I was going to say has actually been covered, so I'll try to be fairly succinct with this. If it comes down to the final issue of recreational and physical education land space, this clearly, from the conversation that we've been having this evening, doesn't meet up to the standards we feel sitting around this room, and doesn't meet up to the flexible guidelines that have been set out for us to try to adhere to. In fact, if you take 6 hours a week on this additional piece of playing field, then that means you're going to have, if you just give every child 1 hour a week on there, you're going to have class sizes of 70. I feel terribly sorry for the person who has to try and look after 70 school kids on a football pitch. That aside, we don't actually have a planning leg to stand on here. We don't like this, and we sympathise greatly, but we will not be able to uphold a decision to reject this application on that basis alone. It's just simply not a planning consideration. So I'm going to move a recommendation to approve on that basis.
That was seconded by Councillor Harwood. Councillor Harwood, as your seconder, do you wish to briefly comment at this point?
No, I mean, we must just look at the balance of the arguments and look at the enhancements that we've achieved since the last meeting, and I don't want to lose them, as I feel we inevitably will. I have a feeling we might see an awful lot of abstentions again tonight. The system is an ass to a certain extent, but it's the system we operate within.
Yes, the system is an ass, Councillor Harwood. It certainly is. And Councillor Powell.
Mr. Chairman, I can't really add a great deal, but one of the things that does concern me with sometimes when we get these planning applications is how it ever comes before this committee in the first place. And the reason why I say that this is a school, and I think the ethics of the school are absolutely wonderful, and that is not an issue at all. I think as a planning application, I think what's actually been put before us tonight is very poor. The school hasn't actually met its capacity requirement, and I'm disappointed that as a council, as officers, that we haven't actually addressed that point. And now we're suggesting that the school is doubled in size. Now, I know that's not a planning consideration, but surely it is an area of common sense. It almost seems, even from the notes field, that we're trying to actually place all the shortfall within the Maidstone West area into one overcrowded area of Maidstone. That really concerns me as well. We're in a difficult position here because this is, yes, the inspector may, and I'm not saying will, because sometimes I think the inspectors actually sometimes use as a threat as opposed to a good reason. But I'm just very, very concerned that the educational kind of needs of people in the Maidstone West area haven't actually taken into consideration. And I think in terms of this particular application, it is a victim of the local plan. And I really can't bring myself to support it. I'm very sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. I'm sure many of us understand where you're coming from. I don't see any other speakers at this point, although I will check. So in that case, a motion to approve, as on the papers with the urgent update, has been moved and seconded. May I ask for all those in favour of that recommendation, please indicate. For those against? Abstentions? Yeah, that's 453. That's, I make that one missing. Should have 13 people, and I've got...
Should we do it again?
And I've got 12. So that can't be right. Yes. Right, try that again, shall we? All those in favour of the motion to approve? Those against? Abstentions? 4. That's 4 now. Okay, that adds up now. Right. Okay, so that motion falls. I don't see anything else on the table, so would anyone care to move something? Because we do need to, presumably, if you're not going to approve it, you're going to refuse it. So can I see someone put forward some grounds, please?
Can I call attention to the provisions there? Right. Sorry, members, if I can, I just want to, as this is now going against a officer's recommendation, I'm just going to say what the Constitution says, all right, on this. If the Planning Committee makes a decision contrary to the officer's recommendations, a detailed minute of the Planning Committee's reasons, which should be full, clear and convincing, should be made and a copy placed on the application file. The officer should also be given the opportunity to explain the implications of any decision contrary to his recommendation. The courts have expressed a view that such reasons should be clear and convincing. The personal circumstances of the applicant will rarely provide such grounds. The wording of reasons for refusal should be clearly understood before the Planning Committee votes on a motion to refuse an application, rather than leaving the drafting to officers to do following the meeting, even if this requires the deferral of the application or a short adjournment in order to draft the wording. Now, if I'm... Sorry,
no, that's it. You don't need to say any more. Right. I'm sure members are all aware of that extract from the Constitution, but thank you very much for reminding us. Now, as I said earlier, members, I think it's fairly clear from what happened with the deferral and from the debate that the only possible ground that could be used for refusal relates to the lack of capacity for outdoor open recreational space upon that site. And in the view of members of this committee, that it is not considered possible, it is not considered that the application meets the standards, and notwithstanding the requirements of flexibility, we do not feel as a committee that those standards can be met within the terms of this application. That's very broadly the parameters. That's what members have said. Is that not correct? Does anyone wish to alter that? Mr. Spoon.
I think we can also add that it's an over-intensive development of the site and will be seriously detrimental to the amenities of local residents.
I think you'd be pushing it. But I'll ask Mr. Bailey to comment on that second ground, as that really didn't come up in the debate, so it's a new point. So I will ask the officer to comment on that.
I think there's 2 points to add on that. In terms of there's no objection in regard to the Environmental Health Officer with regard to noise. With regard to amenity in terms of residents, in terms of Kent Highways have raised no objection to the proposals. And again, we refer back to the Fant Farm inspector's decision in terms of the amenity, because it depends what you're defining as amenity. In terms of what, parking on the roads, in terms of noise generation, in terms of the officer's view, I do not think that that's considered to be a sustainable ground. And with regards to the main ground, as I said, the chairman has raised the issue in terms of the guidelines. They are only, well, he said the standard, they are only guidelines, so members would need to be very aware that they're guidelines and they need to be interpreted flexibly on that basis. I obviously would have to give a duty as an officer. I don't think that there's sustainable grounds to refuse the application on. And I think in terms of on that basis, I would have to give a cost warning on that basis were we to go to an appeal on that basis. I'm not saying significant cost warning. I'm saying to members I don't think those grounds are defendable. And on that basis, I would have to offer a cost warning to members on that basis. And also, the guidance is very clear. It could potentially be a Secretary of State call-in, a very quick Secretary of State call-in, because the Secretary of State in the guidelines turns around and says he will give very due consideration to calling it in for his own determination and for very quick determination, and obviously the unreasonable behaviour that Councillor Harwood raised. As I said, those are the issues for the reasons for the cost warning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Nevertheless, Mr. Bailey, we debated this. Members of the committee, including myself and Councillor Harwood, raised those concerns. The committee has, rightly or wrongly, chosen to take an alternative view. As chairman, I feel it's my duty to try and shape, given what has been done, the ground of refusal such as it is. It is the only potential ground of refusal, whether it's sustainable or otherwise, and it is what we have, unless anyone else wishes to add anything at this point. I'm open to suggestions, but I can't think of anything better in my 35 years of planning experience. So I'm going to suggest that we refuse it for those grounds, and then we take it from there and see what members do. But we do need to have to make a decision. We can't defer it again, because we've done that. So, no, members of the public cannot intervene in this discussion. The only ground, right. I am going to consult the officer to make sure that they're as clear as possible. So give me a moment or two, because this is very important. Right. What I'm going to do to make sure that we're on as strong a ground as is possible in the circumstances, there will be a 5-minute adjournment to consider the wording of the grounds of refusal. I think the parameter is more or less as I set out, but I think we do need to try and get this as watertight as reasonably possible. Meeting's adjourned for about 5 to 10 minutes.